everyone, and welcome to another edition of the GangstaPriest podcast, episode 5, coming at you today, and the first of my first ever 3-part series on a topic. We are, of course, talking about the fantastic, wonderful, one of the greatest TV shows of all time, The Office. Before we jump into the meat of things here, as always, I want to give a few quick notes on the podcast, just a few updates. If you were able to check out my Facebook feed the other day, you might have noticed that I was able to procure, as of Sunday, a brand new Blue Yeti microphone. I've been looking for ways to try to begin to legitimize some of the things I'm doing on the podcast. I've gotten a lot of feedback from you guys. I greatly appreciate that. And a lot of those things you're going to hopefully start seeing come into place with the podcast. One of the first orders of business for me was to get something that was better audio quality. That's not to say I think it's been bad so far, but as you know, if you've been listening into the podcast, I had been stuck using my phone to record the episodes, and so I picked the Blue Yeti mic up, and I'm looking forward to being able to using it for future episodes. The unfortunate news is I have been hit with the technology plague, apparently. You've probably also, have heard on the show that I've been having laptop issues. I finally got the dang thing up and running, and when I went to record yesterday, the laptop wouldn't turn on. I did some digging around and came to find out that it seems that the power cord has completely shut down. So I'm looking into trying to correct that. I am still limited with using my phone, but I'm hoping that sooner rather than later I will have those issues resolved, and we can start to see a transition into, again, starting to legitimize some of the things with the podcast. One other quick note, and I know I've been dropping this a bunch, but I am excited. Next week is going to be our first guest spot on the show. I will be welcoming my good friend from high school, Nathan Ostrander, on. We're still kind of picking through what film we're going to talk about. It's looking like it might be Jojo Rabbit, but it's not been 100% decided yet. Regardless, I will have a bumper for that, I'm sure, by the end of the week. So be looking forward to that. If you are someone who's been listening and you would like to be on the show, please reach out. You can text me. You can email me, Facebook me, whatever works best for you. I am not requiring anybody to come on the show who is a film major or who has seen 2,000 films in their lifetime. I'm simply looking for people who enjoy having a conversation, who have a piece of art, even if it's not film or TV shows we're doing today, something that you feel like you've been able to connect to and can share with others, in keeping with the theme of the podcast. So if that's you, reach out to me. I've already had about 3 or 4 people I've got signed up in the weeks to come. And I'm probably going to stop dropping reminders within the next couple episodes just because I don't want to say it every single time. But I do want to say it just a few more times, just again to remind you and encourage you. If you're interested, reach out to me. There's no need to be anxious. It's a simple conversation between people, and I would absolutely love to have you. So if you've been thinking about it even a little bit, please reach out to me. We'll get you set up, and we'll get you a spot in one of my episodes. With that all out of the way, I do want to jump right into things here. As I already said, we are talking about one of my favorite shows of all time, and I'm sure many of yours as well, and that, of course, is The Office. Now, unless you've been living under a rock for the past 20 years, I guarantee you have had to have some kind of connection with The Office. Be it you've watched the show, you've watched it 100 times, maybe you've only seen an episode, you probably know someone who can quote it like no other, you've seen a clip of it, you know the theme song, you probably know something about this show. And I think that's for good reason. I think that the show is very endearing, and I think there's a lot to talk about on it. And again, as I've said time and time before, my goal is not to teach you what to think, but how to think. And I do that by looking at different themes and doing analysis of different shows or films that have spoken into my life, and then trying to apply my own insight and sharing that with you. And The Office has a treasure trove of great things to talk about, which is why I decided to have my first official 3-part series as opposed to just one singular episode. A couple of quick facts about the episode, or about The Office, if you aren't familiar with it at all. The series, at least the American series, is actually based off of the original series, which was produced in the United Kingdom by Ricky Gervais. And the two shows are very different in tone and style. Perhaps it is a bit biased, but I think that, especially given the fact that it lasted for far longer than the UK edition and has far more episodes, but I do think that the American edition is the superior of the two. I think that while the UK edition was able to set things in motion, the American edition was able to take it in a different direction that made it far more appealing, far broader reaching, and far more encompassing, which again is why it lasted as long as it did and has become one of the most beloved shows for a huge range of people. The series premiered in 2005 on NBC and spanned 9 seasons, which is definitely a feat in itself. It's shot in a mockumentary style, which is basically a riff on a realistic documentary type of shooting. It's a very, I wouldn't say even a very specific style of comedy. It's not maybe as broad reaching as a sitcom, but not as specific as something like Portlandia might be. So I do think there's something in it for everybody. But I can understand why there are a few people out there who maybe it doesn't connect with as much. That being said, I do think that most people I've talked to, in fact, I would say 9 out of 10 people I talk to, do relate to the show in one way or another and have a very certain fondness for The Office. I would go as far to say, I know this is maybe a stretch, but it's my humble opinion. I would go as far to say that The Office is this generation's, people in their 20s and 30s, version of Seinfeld. And I don't mean that to say that the two are the exact same, but that Seinfeld, and that was before my time, but when it was coming out, was drawing record numbers, was killing it in terms of financial success, and has a massive following in its own right. And so I see some similarities, at least myself, I see some similarities in that and The Office. I can't tell you how many times when I talk about TV shows with people that this is the one show that people constantly are rewatching, that are constantly quoting, that are constantly able to connect and relate to. And again, that's why I think, especially for myself personally, I think it made a great choice for my first TV series that I'm talking about here on the show. I was a bit blown away. There was an article that came out in 2016 that I was able to find. The Rolling Stones put out their list of the top 100 TV series of all time. And I was shocked when I saw that The Office was listed at 48 on the list. And the original, which perhaps even maybe raised my eyebrows even more, was listed at number 21. Now, I assume this list was probably put together by a wide team of writers. But I did take it with a grain of salt because when I read the little blurb underneath The Office, the writer for it mentioned, they're talking about characters, mentioned Michael Scott, mentioned Dwight, and then had two strange choices. They mentioned the character of Creed, which I think Creed has some of the best one-liners in the show, but isn't a major player in the series. And then mentioned Mindy Kaling's portrayal of Kelly Kapoor. Now, that's not a knock on Mindy Kaling. I think she's excellent as a writer. I think she does a lot of great work. And I think she was fantastic in her portrayal of Kelly. But if we're being honest with ourselves, Kelly, first of all, is a secondary character. And I don't even know if I would put her in my top 5 in ranking the secondary characters on the show. Certainly, she was an important part of the ensemble. But I would be willing to bet, unless you're the biggest Mindy Kaling Kelly Kapoor fan listening to this episode, she's probably not one of the first people that is mentioned when people are talking about the show. So when I read that, I kind of questioned the authenticity of the writer. And so I think it deserves to be much higher. Again, maybe you love the show, maybe you don't. But if you haven't, I would challenge you. I think one thing that I've recognized a lot of people who aren't fond of it is they really didn't give it time to assess the fullness of the show. I would say that watching at least 2, maybe 3 seasons of the show, and I would specifically focus on the first to the 5th seasons. If you watch through 3 seasons, and it's still not for you, then I can accept that. But if you've only seen 3 or 4 episodes and you're like, well, this show's not that great, then I don't think you can appreciate the fullness that is The Office until you've seen more. And so if you haven't, if you're looking for something binge, if you've never watched the show, please go out and check it out. It is on Netflix. But shifting gears here and getting into the meat of what I want to talk about today, I am breaking this up into 3 parts, and so each episode, tomorrow now's episode, since yesterday was Memorial Day and I didn't get an episode out, but tomorrow's episode is going to focus more on some specific episodes in the series, but today I kind of wanted to follow in line with what I'm doing for most of my other episodes, and that is doing a character analysis of one character in specific on the show and looking at some of the ways that I think we can, again, pull some insight out that applies to the human condition. This character is definitely in the running for best acted character on the show, best written character on the show, the one character that if they weren't there, there probably would be no Office. Of course, I'm talking about the character of Michael Gary Scott, the world's best boss, portrayed by Steve Carell. Now, a couple quick side notes here on Steve Carell. Carell had starred in a few films, or had been a part of a few films and commercials before The Office, most notably playing the role of Brick Tamlin in Anchorman, which, if you haven't seen it, get on that immediately, because that's in my top 3 comedies of all time, alongside Will Ferrell and some other big names. But it was that, and then really the role of Michael Scott that launched Steve Carell into the rest of his career, and rightly so. The brilliance that is behind the character, of course, is a work of the writers, but also the energy that Carell brought to the role, his understanding of the role, and the different ranges that he was able to showcase with it, and his genius with the role is a reflection of the work that Steve Carell has put into his craft. One thing, if you don't know, and this is a personal inspiration, but a lot of times when I am watching a movie or there's somebody that I personally enjoy and kind of like, I wonder how they got to where they are, I'll pull up the old Wikipedia and I'll look about a little bit on their past history. And Carell actually spent several years training and becoming a member at Second City in Chicago. And if you know anything about me, I had the privilege a couple years ago of training a little bit at Second City myself. I still hope, it's still on the agenda to try and get back in school someday. But I consider it hallowed ground, and that many of the top comedic minds of our day and age came from those doors. And so to know that Carell was a member there, to know the hard work that he put in, and to see it pay off in such a way that he was able to not just, do these great things, but to impact so many lives, it's just encouraging. And that if I could even get a fraction of that in my own life, and to touch people with my work in the way that he has with so many people, that would just be an awesome thing. And so, very, very grateful for Steve Carell, as I'm sure many of you are. Also, interesting side note, if you know the character of Carol in The Office, that is actually Steve's wife in real life, who he met at Second City. So, fun little fact there. I'm sure most fans of the show already know that, but if you didn't, there you go. There's your fun fact for the day. As adamant fans of the show will tell you as well, if there was no Michael Scott, or if it was portrayed by probably anybody else, I don't think that the show would have experienced the lasting success that it did. The final 2 seasons of The Office, seasons 8 and 9, Carell actually left the show as he began to take on more film projects. And the quality of the show, while there's still some good episodes and some good things that happen, the quality definitely dips tremendously. And so I think that, again, points to the fact that a lot of the success of The Office was due to the sort of leading work that was done by Steve Carell and sort of being the ringleader of all these different characters. And so the reason why I wanted to talk about Michael today is that I think that there are a lot of layers into the character of Michael Scott, which makes for good discussion. And for those people out there who maybe don't have as much of a connection with The Office. One of the main reasons that I often hear from people is in the character of Michael Scott. They find him very hard to connect to, hard to empathize to, and I can see that. If you take Michael at a superficial level, just at sort of that base level, he is immature, he's annoying, he's ignorant, he's vain, he is bumbling, there's so many faux pas that he does. But unlike the original portrayal, which I can't think of the guy's name, but Ricky Gervais' manager in the United Kingdom's version was a lot more hard to like. Maniacal is probably not the word, but it was just a lot harder to find those qualities in his character. Whereas I think Michael Scott, if you dig in the dirt a little bit, you might just find a diamond in the rough. And I think there's good reason for that. And that's again what I want to focus on here today. So, if you're ever if you're ever interested in doing a character analysis on your own, it's fairly simple to begin doing, and you can do this with anything that's a work of fiction. And heck, you can even do this with historical figures or people in your own life or yourself. But if you're going to reflect on someone and analyze them as a character, I think the first place, or at least a good place to start, is looking in that character's past. I've said this before, but our past often defines our present circumstances. And that doesn't mean that our past, or even our present, defines our future. That's one of the great things about humans, is that we have the ability to change. But in order to do so, in order to be able to accurately assess ourselves in present times and able to change the trajectory of our future, I think it begins by understanding the makeup of our past. And a brief look into Michael's past, as sort of showcases some of the episodes on The Office, I think really speaks a lot to why he might be the way that he is from a psychological standpoint. I wrote down 3 examples here. One of the first occurs in Season 3 in Phyllis's wedding. Michael is recalling when he was a kid and his mother remarried that he was the ring bearer at first in his mother's wedding. And in Michael's mind, he tells this yard of how he was upstaged by a dog. But there is a TV that has a little video clip of the wedding playing in the background. And we find out that Michael comes out with the ring. He throws the pillow down, screams, "I hate you," to presumably his stepfather, and then comedically pees himself and runs off screen crying. Now again, at face value, it might be very easy to write that off and say, wow, what a little baby. You need to grow up and stop being so selfish. But I, for one, cannot imagine being in that situation, going through divorce as a kid. Myself, if you know much about my life in the past couple of years, my own parents actually recently went through divorce. It was finally finalized probably 4 or 5 months ago now. And so it's still relatively fresh. I was very quiet about it for the most part when it was all going on. It was really only those closest to me who kind of knew my thoughts toward it. And there's a variety of reasons for that. But one thing I am thankful for is that at least I was an adult when it occurred. Because even though it was still difficult, I was able to better process my emotions. Kids, they're going through puberty, or they're at a point where they just can't really understand how to deal with those emotions. And so I can't imagine my sister example, my youngest sister, who's 10 years apart from me, was in the house at the time that all this was going on. And it was very hard for me because I wanted to reach out and be there for her. But again, I could not fathom what she was going through, as I can't fathom what anyone who's gone through that at a young age has. And so, again, here with Michael, I think that might be something that points to a little bit about his present circumstances. The next example I wrote down was in the episode Take Your Daughter to Work Day, which is in Season 2, in which the employees of the office bring in their kids for the day, and Michael, who's in his 40s and has no kids of his own, tries his hardest to connect with the kids, and it's just not working. And so finally, Michael gets the bright idea, and he tells the kids that when he was a kid himself, he actually starred on a children's show. And he has the video evidence to prove it. So he gathers all the kids and the employees in the conference room, and they watch a clip of this show that Michael was on as a kid. And so in this clip, there's a little puppet, and the children are coming up to the puppet, and the puppet asks them, well, what's your dream? And so the first character that we see comes up and tells the puppet that when he gets older, he wants to be on TV. And the members of the office recognize that, hey, this boy is so-and-so, and he is, and I can't remember if it's the current weatherman, or he's just a news reporter, or the sports reporter, or what it is, but they all are happy with the fact that this kid had a dream, and he is living the dream out, and they think that's awesome. And then the comedy comes to play when it contrasts, and it cuts to Michael, who's the next kid to come up. And Michael's dream is a lot more bizarre. Michael's dream is, my dream is to get married, and to have 100 kids so I can have 100 friends, and no one can say no to being my friend. And so the puppet kind of deadpans to the camera, because he has no clue how to respond to that. And so he kind of just pats Michael on the back and sends him on his way. And so then it cuts back to the kids in the conference room, and they ask Michael, well, did you do it? Did you have kids? Did you live to your dream? And Michael very sadly says, no, I didn't. And he kind of leaves the room to go be by himself. And last but not least, in season 7 in the episode Counseling, Michael has to sit through a counseling session as determined by corporate with his arch enemy, Toby, who, in the course of the series, Michael views Toby as everything that is the opposite of Michael Scott. Michael is fun and joyful and tries to bring positivity to the office, and Toby is the man always trying to bring Michael down. And so Toby is trying his hardest to pull from Michael some things in this counseling session, but he ends up, and they start kind of doing some activities, but Michael tells this story about how when he was younger, and Jeff, he calls him Jeff, but it's a stepdad, took him to a baseball game. And Michael says that he remembers that during the game the pitcher was removed, and he felt very sad about this. But his stepdad leaned over and told him that the manager was making a very smart move, and that he was really proud of the manager. And so Toby kind of grins a little bit to himself, but we as the viewers, it's kind of a tip-off to us too. Of course, Michael is the manager of Dunder Mifflin and takes great pride in his work. And so perhaps in that moment, just the fact that Michael remembers that, that showcases a little bit again in his past about where he's at in his present. And so the reason that I share those things is, again, I think to someone who sees someone and kind of sees the superficial base layer things and writes them off. Again, if we're ever going to properly analyze someone, either character or person, and properly be able to understand them and maybe respect them and know their story, you're just not going to do it if you don't have the whole picture. And part of that picture is that person's past. And so I want to encourage you, first of all, if there's someone in your life that maybe you've done that, you've written them off, be a little bit more open to that. Maybe spend some time figuring out their past. And that's not to say everybody has some deep, dark past that's limited. You know, some people just are the way they are because it's the way that they are. But more often than not, there's something back there that, again, has led to our present circumstances. And so now we shift to present-day Michael, an assessment of where we see Michael in present-day times and all throughout the course of The Office. Michael has sacrificed everything for his company. He sort of has an old school mentality in that. I think in our day and age, you see a lot of people who work a job and they're shifting and doing new jobs constantly, every maybe even a couple of years. But once upon a time, people got a job and they were loyal to the company and they did it for 30 years and retired and lived out the rest of their days. And Michael kind of has this mindset. He has found a company that he loves, that he feels has been good to him, that has given him several things, and he is willing to go above and beyond for his position and for this company. Michael also has several failed romantic relationships. This is a running theme in the office. Michael's constantly looking for love. He's digging in all the wrong places, but he keeps chasing that treasure, which for in his mind is marriage and having a family. Michael's in his 40s. He has no kids. And it honestly doesn't seem like he has too many friends. And that's not to say there aren't people who care about Michael and who are friendly towards Michael. You know, Michael, in his mind, thinks that Todd Packer is one of his best friends, but as we, the audience, know, Todd Packer is not the greatest of human beings. One could argue that Dwight is very good friends with Michael, and that relationship might be one-sided in the opposite direction. Dwight is constantly fawning for Michael's attention, but what can be said about Dwight is that he is loyal, for the most part, to Michael Scott. Even though there is the bumps in the road in their relationship, Dwight is Michael's hype man. He's his right-hand man, and through thick and through thin, he's right down there in the thick of things with Michael. And while Michael does have a great job and money and power, which are all things that people seek in life, I wrote down, I don't know, at least for me personally, and I don't know too many people who would look at Michael's life and would envy it. Would say, I wish I was Michael, or I wish I could have that life. At times in the series, he feels like a sad clown. A character who wants so many things, but can never get any of them. And so he becomes the butt of the joke. The dreg of society. The person that people can say, well, my life might be bad, but at least I ain't that guy. Man, screw that guy. I'd hate to have that life. And while Michael does have some of these material things, there's a lot of moments that, again, make you kind of feel for Michael. And you can feel his loneliness, and you can feel his sense of inadequacy. And it's even said by some of the other characters throughout the course of the show when they're kind of hashing it out with Michael. He is a man that needs a lot of love, which is something that we all need. But different folks need it in different spades. Some of you listening to this are people who, one or two people in your life who love on you, or a community loves on you, you're good. That's all you need. And then there's other people like Michael, and I would put myself in this category, who need to be bathed in love and showered in love daily. And a good bit of that is rooted in ego. I am quick to admit that about myself. But there's something else where I think that when you give a lot of yourself, you need a lot to replenish that. And when you don't get that, it can cause this disruption that is not good for your soul. And Michael, I think, certainly fits that bill. Michael also is trapped, and this is something else that The Office does fantastically, but trapped in the banality that is the modern workplace. If you think of a movie like Office Space, or what The Office does so well, usually we go to fiction and fantasy because it's an escape from reality. And the reason that we want to escape from reality is because reality feels so boring. The day-to-day, the wake up, put on your work clothes, ride the transit into town, go to your cubicle, type out some emails, answer some calls, go to some meetings, eat your lunch, come home, take a shower, eat some dinner, rinse, and go to bed, and rinse and repeat. And you do that for 30 years, and then you collect your retirement, and you kick you out the door, and that's that. I don't really think that sounds like a life that most of us want to live, but in modern times often find that we're living in them. And Michael's no stranger to this as well. He is the manager of the office. He spends all this time in the office. But the unique thing about Michael is that he tries to overcome this through fun, through games, through encouragement, through playfulness. That's something that I think a lot of us are missing. And it's in this setting that Michael, as a character and as a person, either shines or fumbles his way through so many things. Many of the episodes surround Michael's many social faux pas and his triumphs and his shortcomings. And so looking at that as a character reflection, even though there's a lot of bad in there and things that make us roll our eyes at Michael and go, what are you doing? I think that the good far outweighs the bad. And that's what I want to focus on the back half of this podcast. Is for those of you, some of you guys already agree with me, and so I want to challenge you in some ways and reinforce some things in that. For those of you that don't think that about Michael, who find him annoying, I want you to set aside that bias for just a minute. And you don't have to agree to me. As I always say, I want to teach you how to think, not what to think. So you don't have to agree with me. At the end of this, you could think that Michael is still not that great of a character, but there's a reason why I want you to check that at the door. And that's part of the other makeup of the back half of this, what we're going to talk about. But I think if you begin to peel back those layers, you'll start to see someone who, again, at his core, is a good man. And I think the only thing that really disrupts this, and this is a huge chunk of this is on the writer's part, as you're going through TV, you got to think, this is year after year they're doing this thing. And the writing team changes. You know, people get different jobs, people pursue different interests. And so sometimes you get a writer who comes in and they think they've got a great idea for the character or a direction they want to take the character in or a situation they want to create. And so they write it up and they produce the episode. And the problem with that, especially with a character like Michael Scott, is there's this sort of line of believability, right? Most of us probably don't know someone who looks eye for eye like Michael Scott. But you can probably think of someone who maybe has some shades of him, who doesn't always get social clues or social context. And so Michael, when he crosses that line, that's what creates the comedy and creates the reflection. The problem is, the further you stray from that line of believability, and when you create moments that it's hard to believe that anybody, no matter how clueless you are, anybody could do something like that, it does it at the expense of the character. And so while you may strike gold every once in a while in a great comedic setup, more often than not, on the outside of the scene, it comes out to the detriment of the character, and you walk away from that scene with a sort of hurt perception of them. And this happens in The Office. It's not very often, thankfully, but there are about 4 or 5 instances, and maybe a couple more, where I think Michael does something that, at least to me, is so out there and so cringeworthy that it's like, these are the moments that if you're someone who watches and those are the episodes you choose, I get why you might not like Michael so much. And so that's what I want to challenge you again heading into this, is to, when I list off some of those things, what I do is I try to just pretend as if they didn't happen. Obviously they happen in the course of the show, but since there's so many different writers, and I think that it's such a small percentage of the complexity of Michael, and it's so far outside the realm of believability, I say, well, I don't know if that's really Michael Scott, the real Michael Scott. So I try not to hold those things against him, and I want to encourage you to do the same. So I wrote down a couple things here, and I actually have done a few takes on this episode. I've had some more technical difficulties, imagine that. But I don't want to spend too much time on this. I realize that I want to treat this as if you're someone who has seen this. And as you know, there's countless examples of this in the show. So I don't want to spend too long talking about these, but there's 3 sort of categories here I separated. The first is the bad. And these are some of the shortcomings of Michael that I think are, in the end, even though they sort of make you roll your eyes at him and give that big heavy sigh, we can overlook them. These are instances like Michael having breakfast in bed and burning his foot on a George Foreman grill, then coming into the office and demanding everyone give him his attention and fawning over him and his perceived injury. Things like running Meredith over with a car, or challenging the entire warehouse to a basketball game in which the winner doesn't have to come in and work on a Saturday. One of the best examples of this is in the episode Diversity Day, which is one of the earlier episodes of the series. But Michael gets the bright idea that corporate doesn't know crap about teaching diversity, and so Michael is going to teach it instead. And he gets this harebrained scheme in which he's going to put an index card with a nationality or a cultural implication on everyone's forehead so they can't see it. And he's going to make everyone get together in the room and go around and pretend to be the character that they see on the other person's forehead to that person, wherein that person has to guess what nationality they are. I don't really understand what the Michael School of training is meant to teach with this. I don't know if he thinks that in showcasing these stereotypes, he can show that there's a little bit of truth to them, but that they're not a good thing. But of course, the scene breaks down when no one's really getting into it, and so Michael decides to take it upon himself to stir the pot. And in the room comes Kelly Kapoor, who of course is Indian. And Michael decides that he is going to give this overly dramatic caricature of an Indian person working in a convenience store. And so as Kelly comes in, he goes, "Hello, welcome to my shop. Hello, hello, come in. Oh, try my cookie. It's only 59 cents. Try my cookie. Try my cookie. It's very good." And he keeps, egging Kelly on, and this leads to Kelly slapping Michael across the face, which, of course, is probably very well deserved. But those are the moments to me that when you watch them, you can see the comedy in it, you can see the faux pas, but we can still come to accept that there's probably people out there that are that socially clueless, and we're willing to accept and forgive Michael. And part of that is because of the motivation. Michael, I don't think there are instances of it, but very few where Michael is coming from a place of just downright wanting to be mean towards someone. It's usually from someone who is insecure and, again, I think is just clueless and ignorant of the situation. And so that's kind of why we can forgive Michael a little bit in that. Now, some of the next things I wrote down are these cringeworthy moments. And these are the things that, again, please do not hold the character of Michael Scott to these, because when you watch these moments, these are the episodes that I myself go, Jesus, how can somebody be that small-minded or so oblivious to social clues and social context? These include things like the rejection of Phyllis's gift in the first Christmas episode, in which the employees come in to do a Secret Santa exchange, and Michael has decided to ignore the $20 limit on gifts and bring in an iPod to share the joy of Christmas and to show how great of a giver he is because of how much he spent. And Michael gets his gift from Phyllis, who has given Michael a hand-knitted oven mitt. And a very thoughtful gift. But Michael cannot see this. Michael is beside himself, and he storms out of the room, angry at Phyllis for ruining Christmas because her gift was not as great as his. Which, of course, is a very, very hurtful thing and tramples upon Phyllis's feelings. Other episodes like this include the booze cruise, where Michael becomes so self-infatuated that he tries to take over the duties of the captain on this trip that's supposed to be for more people other than just the employees of the office. Another example of this is in, again, Phyllis's wedding, when Michael, who other than being Phyllis's boss, doesn't really have this deep emotional connection to her. But Phyllis tries to honor Michael and play ball with him a little bit by giving him a role in the wedding, offers Michael to push her father, who is wheelchair-bound, down the aisle during the course of her wedding. However, about halfway through this, Phyllis's father stands up under his own will in a desire to walk his daughter the remaining way to the end of the aisle before giving her away. Now, as audience, both the audience in the wedding and us as viewers, we see that, and that's something to be proud of, to think, wow, here's a man who is, through his own self-will, is doing something that he perceives as important. But Michael is so self-obsessed that all he can think about is how he was upstaged by the old man and how all day long he had to drive this lazy ass around in a wheelchair when he could have been walking the whole time. So it's things like that that give you a little bit of an insight into Michael's character. The most cringeworthy offense, and you can take a second and think about what episode I'm going to mention, but I'd be willing to bet most of you know. It's the one episode that, in fact, when I've watched through the series about 7 or 8 times, and maybe even more, but whenever I get to that episode, I have to often skip over it because it's just so nauseating, and you watch it and go, how can someone be this clueless? That's where you get to that point where it's like, I'm trying to like you, but it's really, really hard. And so if you have a guess, the answer is Scott's Tots, in which Michael, 10 years prior, has promised a group of kids in school that if they work hard and they do well in school, that Michael will pay for their tuition in college. And as we all know, Michael does not have enough money to do this, and so in the episode, the day has come for Michael to pay his tab, and so the school calls Michael to celebrate the occasion, and the rest of the episode centers around the unease Michael, of course, feels because he's promised this thing to his kids, and maybe what was a well-meaning thought, but not a very practical one, and now he has to own up to telling these kids that he's going to have to crush their dreams because he can't pay up. And perhaps the most unsettling part of the episode is when the kids come out to honor Michael Scott by performing a little dance routine and jingle in which they sing, "Tell us, Mr. Scott, what you gonna do? What you gonna do to make our dreams come true?" And you're just sitting there putting your head in your hands the entire time going, oh my God, what is wrong with this man? And so those are the things, like I said, that is within the realm of being cringeworthy. And so I completely get when those things happen where you might it might be a bit easier to write him off for nothing to do with him. But in defense of Michael Scott, and moving towards some of the final points I want to bring up on his character assessment, there is a lot of good to Michael, and there's a lot more that meets the eye. And I think you see this in constant examples throughout the series. One of the first is in Michael's competence and really exceptional ability as a salesman. In the episode The Client, Jan and Michael are meeting with a local client, a local head of the education system in Scranton, at Chili's in order to try and win his business. And Michael goes at it in his own way of doing things, and Jan, the entire episode, is constantly trying to undermine Michael and do tactics her way, and Michael kind of waves her off, and he's like, I got it. And by the end of the episode, Michael is able to close the deal. And that's part of the brilliance that is Michael Scott. He is, under the surface, a pretty dang good salesman. And he knows paper. And he knows his business. He knows his clients. And he knows how to connect with people. There's other things. Michael's constantly fighting for his employees. And sometimes he gets in the way of it. But he will go to great lengths to protect employees and to keep employees and to make them feel loved and part of a family. Michael's also constantly trying to raise the morale of the office. The best example of this is in the Dundies, in which Michael has put together, through his own doing, and again, part of his ego, because he wants to be the ringleader, he likes attention, but Michael puts together this little awards ceremony. It's a silly, superficial thing, but he does so because he wants to recognize his employees and boost their morale. He sacrifices and thinks outside of himself to try and bring joy to others. There's plenty of other examples in the series, and I'd be interested, if you've got some of your own, please comment below, because I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. But one of the best examples of this, I think, is in the episode where Michael goes to talk at business school in Ryan's class. And another great thing about The Office is they're able to weave several storylines together in the course of an episode. But one of the other storylines of the episode is Pam is having an art show. Pam, over the course of several episodes, has begun taking art classes, has found an interest in it and a passion in it, and so she wants to share that passion with her coworkers. And so Pam invites all her coworkers to her show. But as the night progresses, very few of them show up. Oscar shows up with his boyfriend, but they belittle Pam's art and kind of demean her ability. Roy, Pam's fiancé, shows up, and he's well-meaning and trying to be there, but I don't think Roy fully understands why Pam is doing what she's doing. And so the long night goes on, and it's finally time to close up shop, and Pam's beginning to take her paintings down. No one else has come. And here, last minute, comes Michael Scott. And Michael says to her, hey, I'm so sorry. I'm late. I had to get all the way across town. And he begins looking at Pam's art, and he notices a picture she's done of The Office. And Michael is staring at it, and he turns and looks to her, and he says, how much? And Pam is kind of caught off guard by it, and she says, "What do you mean?" And Michael says, "Well, I don't see a price. I want to buy it. Of course, I must have it for the office." And he reflects for a little bit more, and then he looks over at Pam, and there's this very nice moment where he smiles at her, and he says, "I'm really proud of you." And that moment, there's several other moments in the series where Michael kind of acts as this quasi-impromptu father figure to characters. But it's a really powerful moment. You see it in the reaction of Pam as she embraces Michael and sort of tears up a bit. And I think that showcases the impact of sacrificing, and whether it's intentional or not, of being there for others and encouraging them in their pursuits. Just one simple person, one simple phrase, one sentence, words of affirmation, the impact that we can have on people's lives. And it's that thing right there that it kind of connects me into my final assessment of Michael, and then some points I want to leave you with. As I've said before, I can understand the rejection of the character of Michael based on his ineptitude and his constant harboring for attention and many of the misguided things that he does. But I want to remind you that a person's a person, no matter how small. And two other things that I wrote down, just kind of general things. One of these, the first, comes from Moulin Rouge, which is an excellent film. The greatest thing you'll ever learn is just to love and be loved in return. And the other quote, coming from the fantastic work Les Miserables, to love another person is to see the face of God. You see, some of Michael's strengths is that despite all the adversity that he faces in his life, and there's a lot of it, his employees don't always like him, he fails in his relationship, there's a lot of self-doubt and insecurity. This is showcased in the episode Stress Relief Part 2, where Michael tries to raise spirits by having a roast of himself. And yes, Michael put himself in that position. And yes, Michael might have asked for some of it. And yes, a lot of it is just well-meaning fun. That's what roasts are. But as Michael says in that episode, typically the roastees, when they're done, say a few nice things about the person they're roasting. And no one really does this for Michael. And so when it's his turn to speak, with all the negative things that have been said about him, Michael kind of chokes up and runs off stage. And he's absent from the office for half the day, but when he finally comes back after reflecting for a bit, Michael rises above by roasting everybody in the office, which leads to this wonderful reaction from Stanley, who breaks out into laughter that becomes infectious. And at the end of it, Michael says, I kid, you guys are my family, and I love you. And, I'm here for you. And so, I think in spite of all these things that happen to Michael, and things that would be very easy for him to become this very mean-spirited, angry sort of individual, Michael constantly is overcoming that and trying to be the best he can be in all things. I also love, there's a quote he says to Ryan, two quotes in the same episode. Actually, no, I'm sorry, there's two different episodes. The first is, good managers hire people and inspire people. And unlike paper, people will never go out of business. Michael understands, and I really think that the root of this is from feeling so lonely himself and having years of not feeling any connection to anyone, but Michael understands how to connect to people and how to build them up. And I think he seeks to do that in all sorts of different ways. I think he seeks to do it through bringing fun and being joyful and trying to lift people's spirits up. In another episode, he says, we're not on the playground anymore. There are new rules. We have to be mature, but we can't lose the spirit of childlike wonder. When Michael makes things like the "that's what she said" joke, or is acting goofy and being flirtatious, yes, a lot of times he crosses the line. But I think I'd rather have someone like him around to offset the muck and the grind of daily life than people who are so obsessed with being socially right. One of my improv books talks about this. When we're kids, we don't have that spirit. When you're a kid, you just want to have fun. But at some point, we start getting told what the rules are, And we sort of reject that, and we lose that sense of playfulness. And that's something that Michael has never lost. And it's encouraging to me because I want to be like that. I want to be that bright spirit that can light up someone's life through the way that I live. The other thing I think about Michael is he is incredibly genuine in everything that he does. Jim says about him in one scene in an episode, say what you will about Michael Scott, but he wouldn't do that. I think everyone knows that Michael, what you see is what you get. He's face value. And I think that's why in that moment with Pam, it's so powerful because you know it's coming directly from the heart. Michael just lets it out. Even if it's a word garbage, sometimes I start a sentence and I don't know where it goes. That's who he is. But you got to love him and respect him for it. And so to wrap this up today, I wrote down just 3 kind of final thoughts here. I want to give 2 verses of scripture, tell a quick story, and then give 3 final thoughts to send you off with, and ways and things we can take from Michael to hopefully, again, reflect and better our own lives. As I said with Michael, in his past and some of the ways that you see he's treated, it would be very easy for him to become this embittered, angry, defeated, and hurt person. And I think that's true of our own lives. I've talked about this before on Facebook, and I know sometimes it comes across as dramatic, but I think there's some truth in that mankind can be the cruelest animal of all. And sometimes we don't even know what we're doing it, but we impact people in ways that have negative effects. We are cruel to them, we're mean to them, we mock them, we find ways to belittle them. Even worse, we forget about them. When people feel like they don't have anyone, they do one of 2 things. As they go down that path, they either become very closed off to the world and very sad and depressed and want nothing to do with anyone, or they harden their heart and they fire the self-destruct button, or they turn their destruction towards everyone else and they say, well, if I can't be happy, no one else can. And I think we've all experienced that. But the way to overcome that, and the way that I see Michael doing that, and the way that I want to do that, is through self-sacrificial love and compassion and joy. Romans 12:9 says, love must be sincere. Share with people in need. Bless those who persecute you, and live in harmony with one another. And 1 Peter 4:8 says, above all, love each other deeply, because love covers a multitude of sins. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, the greatest thing, or to love another person, is to see the face of God. And as I mentioned earlier, there's all sorts of different needs in terms of love. But the one thing that connects and unites us is that in some way, we all have a longing for love and for connection. And that's a reflection of the way that we are created by God. We long for a relationship with Him, and we long for a relationship with other people because other people are His creations as well. But the problem is, and sometimes in our actions, we tend to forget about that, or we overlook that, or as I see people in the character of Michael Scott, we take them at face value, and we simply write them off. And we're like, well, I want nothing to do with this guy. And what I want to pause and get you to reflect on is the potential for damage there in that. I want to share a really quick story here, and I don't want to talk for too much longer because I'm running out of time, but as a lot of you know, in my current position, I work with a medical company, and in my current role, I'm a laser technician, so I go into hospitals and I perform the laser for a variety of different surgeries. But when I first started with the company, I was actually stationed at a hospital near my apartment. And I was basically the account manager. I was responsible for renting out the equipment, for making sure it was kept up well. But in my day-to-day, I was constantly going into all the rooms of this hospital and encountering patients, even for a brief moment of time. And this hospital in particular was in a very rough neighborhood of town. So a lot of the patients were very worn down, very downtrodden. And so you saw a lot of sad things. And one man in particular that has sort of stuck with me was this man who, I could not believe it, had been in this hospital for 4 years in the exact same room. And when I first saw it, I thought this has to be a mistake. This can't be true. But the hospital staff informed me that this man had been there for 4 years, and there was some legality to it. He wasn't in a coma. He was responsive, but he had a lot of health issues. And so off and on, he was on one of our beds. So I would have to go and see this very pale, very gaunt man. And I would constantly go in, and he would talk to me a little bit, but I would kind of find him, looking out the window every time I would go in there. And it was always a hard thing for me, sometimes an uncomfortable thing. But eventually I would leave and transition to my current role. And when I left, I remember I had shared the information about this with the worker that replaced me. And we would talk about it from time to time. And about 5 months after I had left, my coworker reached out to me, and she let me know that this man had ended up passing away. And I obviously didn't know this guy. I had no personal connection with him, but there's been a lot of times where I have reflected upon it. And I think we as Christians, sometimes we fail in being that love towards others. I've walked in those halls of loneliness. I've been in those places where you feel despair, where you feel like the world's against you, you feel like you have no one. And I've also been a person who has withheld that from people. So I've been on both sides of the coin. But I can tell you that on the receiving end of it, it does not feel fun. And most of us, to some degree, have experienced pain and hurt and suffering and the longing to be accepted and wanted. And we see this in the example of Christ. And that love has to be self-sacrificial. Christ talks about this. He tells a story, but he says, when I was sick, you helped me. When I was hungry, you gave me food. When I was poor, you took me in. And I think a lot of times where we fail as Christians is we do not have, just like Michael Scott, we do not have this warm sense of welcomeness. We don't go out and seek people like Christ did. We give our love out to a few people, but we don't openly go out and seek people. And often, again, we look at characters like this and we see their shortcomings and we see their failures and we kind of write them off. But what I want to remind you is none of us in the first place deserve the glory of God. Not one of us. And yet, in our sin, and our multitude of sins, it's easy to look at Michael and his cringeworthy moments, but we're just the same. And you might be thinking, I've never murdered anybody. But again, think of that. Think of, maybe, someone wanted your love or wanted your attention, your time, and you denied them that. And again, maybe it wasn't intentional, maybe it wasn't, but the detriment that I think that has on the soul of a person is far more reaching sometimes. Because it chips away at you, and every single person that denies you, it just removes your humanity. And you see, you see this in the day and age that we live in. And if we want to fight this, you have to check yourself at the door. You have to reach out in that self-sacrificial love and be larger than yourself. And I think if you really want to live a life of purpose, a lot of us want to go out and do great things. I myself am one of them, and I get that. But if you want to start seeing change, do it on a day-to-day basis in the little things. Maybe it's a smile. Maybe it's inviting someone. Maybe it's finding ways to utilize your talents and sharing that with people. I don't know what it is. But if you want to fight and combat that sense of loss, and maybe some of the things that, again, you see and feel sorrowful for Michael, you start doing that by being the hand that reaches out and being intentional. And it takes confidence. And it takes a lot of energy, and I realize that if you try and do it on your own, you're going to fail. But if you have Christ as your foundation, and you try day to day to live out the example that is Him, and you do it with intentionality and you think outside yourself, you're going to make a difference. I guarantee it. And so there's 3 ways that I want you to try and be like Mike. I want you to be like Mike in trying to bring joy to others. I want you to be like Mike in finding ways to support others. And I want you to be like Mike in trying to be the best you can be. The pains of defeat we often feel in life, they suck. They hurt a lot. But it's going through those valleys that makes seeing the view at the top of the mountain that much more sweeter. You see it with Michael. You see all his defeats. It's all out there for you to see. But when he does succeed, it's a sweet moment. You see it in the moment in one of the early episodes when they have the Office Olympics. And he's standing on the podium, and he says, "My heart is full." And I think that's the impact that we can have on people if we start to reach out in joy, in love, and bringing that happiness to people in self-sacrifice. I want to end there. I know I'm running out of time here. But I want to hear your thoughts on that. There's far more that can be said, but we can say that for a one-on-one time, discussion, whatever. I really hope you enjoyed today's episode. I think there's a lot of reflection and still more reflection for me personally to be had on it. We are going to continue with this momentum into another episode on The Office. It'll drop tomorrow. So I hope you're looking forward to that. And I kind of want to end there. So thanks for checking the show out today. Again, please like, share, and subscribe. Give me your feedback. Help me to keep going with this thing. I want to thank you all for your support. And until next time, this has been the GangstaPriest podcast, and we'll see you then.